Every morning, before the bees even begin to stir, before the first ray of light touches the hive boxes, there is already someone watching. Someone who has been there longer than any alarm, longer than any camera, longer than any fence. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to never work alone again? Not just with tools and techniques, but with a presence that truly watches your back, asterisk asterisk. Because what I'm about to share with you changed the way I approach every single day at the apiary. And if you've ever felt that quiet unease working remote land by yourself, you're going to want to hear every word of this. My name is Henry Stonefield. I've been a beekeeper for 36 years. I've spoken at programs like this one for 21 of them. And in all that time, across all the hives, all the harvests, all the seasons, nothing has surprised me quite like what a dog taught me about keeping bees. Today we're talking about something most beekeeping manuals never mention: the role of a canine companion at the apiary, not as a novelty, not as a hobby crossover, but as a genuine, functional, emotionally grounding part of sustainable apiary management. Stay with me until the end of this talk, because I'm going to walk you through real experience, field situations, behavioral patterns, and lessons I could never have learned from a textbook. These are things you'll be able to take back to your own operation and actually use. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. A dog near the hives? Isn't that asking for trouble? And that's a fair instinct. But the answer, as with most things in apiculture, lies in observation, patience, and respect for natural systems. The same principles that guide how we manage colonies are the same principles that guide how we integrate a dog into that environment. Let me take you back to a morning about 12 years ago. I was working a remote site in the highlands. No phone signal. Nearest road was 40 minutes by foot. I had 16 hives in a clearing surrounded by oak and gorse, and I had been losing equipment. Not to weather, not to disease, to theft. 3 supers gone in one season. 1 full hive lifted clean off its stand overnight. I filed reports. I installed markers. I changed access routes. Nothing worked. And then one evening, my daughter's dog, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois named Rook, followed me to the site. I didn't plan it. He simply refused to stay behind. That night, nothing happened. The following week, nothing happened. Within a month, the losses stopped entirely. Now, I'm a scientist by training. I don't believe in coincidence as explanation. So I started paying attention. And what I noticed over the next several months fundamentally changed how I think about apiary security and about the relationship between the keeper, the land, and the animals we work alongside. A dog like Rook doesn't just deter, he detects. His olfactory system is estimated to be between 10,000 and 100,000 times more sensitive than ours. His hearing range extends well beyond human perception. He processes environmental information in real time, constantly, without fatigue, without distraction. While I'm focused on a frame, reading brood patterns, assessing capped cells, he is reading the perimeter. And what he reads, he communicates. Not in words, obviously, but in posture, in stillness, in the direction of his gaze. If you learn to read your dog the way you learn to read your bees, you gain an early warning system that no electronic device can fully replicate. I want to be precise about this, because precision matters in our field. A dog near an apiary is not a passive presence. It is an active environmental sensor with behavioral outputs. And those outputs, when you know how to interpret them, give you information about what is happening beyond your line of sight. Regions where wild boar are common, the damage they cause to ground-level hive stands can be catastrophic. A boar moving through undergrowth at night will be detected by a trained dog long before it reaches the clearing. The dog's response, alert posture, low vocalization, directional focus, gives you time to intervene, time to reinforce, time to act. The same applies to foxes investigating weak colonies, to stray livestock drifting onto apiary land, and in certain mountain regions, to bears. In those environments, a dog is not a luxury. It is a layer of protection that has existed in pastoral cultures for thousands of years, and that modern apiculture has, in many cases, quietly abandoned. We abandoned it in the name of efficiency, in the name of simplification, in the same way we abandoned polyculture for monoculture, and wild forage for industrial feed. And in doing so, we lost something real, something functional that also happened to be deeply human. Because here is what no manual will tell you: the apiary can be a lonely place. not in a poetic sense, in a practical, psychological, physiological sense. Working remote land, in silence, often for hours, with no other human presence. It accumulates. Studies on rural workers consistently show elevated cortisol levels associated with prolonged solitary physical labor. The isolation is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It simply settles, slowly, over seasons. And what the research also shows, and this is well documented in occupational psychology, is that the presence of a dog during manual work measurably reduces stress markers, heart rate, cortisol, perceived exertion. All of them shift, not because the dog does the work, but because the nervous system registers companionship. It registers not being alone. And when you are not alone, you work differently. You make better decisions. You take fewer unnecessary risks. You stay longer, observe more carefully, and leave the site in better condition, mentally and physically. I have spoken with apicultors across Europe, across South America, across parts of Asia, and the ones who work with dogs consistently describe the same phenomenon. A kind of grounded calm that settles over the workday, when there is another living presence sharing the space. That is not sentiment. That is biology. And if you're finding value in what I'm sharing today, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Because what we discuss here, practical, experience-based apiculture, is exactly the kind of content that will make you a better, more complete beekeeper. Every video is built on decades of real fieldwork. Subscribe now, and don't miss what's coming next. Now, let me address the question I know is forming in the minds of those of you who have worked closely with your colonies. What about the bees? Because bees, as we know, are extraordinarily sensitive to movement, vibration, and scent. A nervous animal near the hives is not a neutral presence. It is a provocation. And a provoked colony in the middle of an inspection is a situation none of us wants to manage. So how does this work? The answer is the same answer that applies to every element of good apiary practice. Gradual introduction. Consistent exposure. Respect for thresholds. A dog that is brought to the apiary for the first time as an adult, with no prior conditioning, will likely react poorly to the sound and the flight activity. The bees will respond in kind. But a dog introduced slowly, first at distance, then progressively closer, always in calm conditions, always with the keeper present and composed, learns to read the apiary the way the keeper reads it, as a managed environment. A working space, one that requires stillness, not agitation. Rook, my Belgian Malinois, took approximately 4 months to reach full comfort near the hives. 4 months of patient, deliberate exposure. By the end of that period, he would lie in the shade at the edge of the apiary, during full inspections, ears tracking, nose working, completely still. The bees ignored him entirely, because he had learned what they needed from him, which was exactly nothing. That is the art of it. Not training the dog to perform at the apiary, training the dog to be present without disturbing. There is a meaningful distinction there, and it maps directly onto how we think about good beekeeping itself. The best inspections are the ones the colony barely notices. The best keepers are the ones who move through the apiary, as if they belong to it, not as if they are invading it. A well-conditioned dog embodies that same principle. He belongs there. He is part of the system, and the system functions better for his presence. Now I want to shift into something that I think will resonate with those of you who have been in this work for more than a decade. Because beyond the security, beyond the stress reduction, beyond the early warning, there is something else a dog brings to the apiary. Something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore once you've experienced it. He changes how you show up. When Rook is with me at the site, I walk differently. I observe more. I am less rushed. Not because he slows me down, but because his presence reminds me that I am part of a living system, not managing it from outside. He moves through the landscape reading it constantly, and watching him do that, watching a creature engage so completely and instinctively with the environment, pulls you back into that mode of attention that modern apiculture sometimes trains out of us. We get focused on data, on treatments, on yield, and those things matter. They are important. But the foundation of sustainable apiculture has always been observation. Real, patient, embodied observation. And a dog, strangely, beautifully, is one of the most effective reminders of that I have ever encountered. There is a moment that happens at the apiary, usually in the late afternoon, when the flight activity begins to settle, and the hive sounds shift into that low, steady hum that every experienced beekeeper learns to love. In those moments, with Rook beside me, I have felt something I can only describe as completeness. Not productivity, not efficiency, completeness. And I believe that feeling matters. Because sustainable apiculture is not only about what we extract from the land, it is about what we bring to it. Our attention, our patience, our presence. If any of this connects with your own experience at the hive, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you work alone, or do you have a companion at your apiary? Your story matters, and your questions will shape the content I create next. Because this community grows when we share honestly. And there is more to come on this topic. More on how to introduce a dog to an active apiary safely. More on the specific breeds that adapt best to this environment. And more on the deeper relationship between sustainable land practices and the animals we choose to work alongside. Stay with me. The most important part is still ahead. Let me tell you what I have observed across 36 years, and what I believe every serious apiculturist needs to hear. The future of this craft does not belong to those who work harder. It belongs to those who work with greater awareness. Awareness of the land, of the season, of the colony, and yes, of the living systems around them. A dog at the apiary is not a trend. It is a return to the kind of integrated, attentive, land-based practice that built this craft long before we had treatments, extractors, or data loggers. The apicultors who taught me, men and women who had worked the same land for decades, never separated their animals from their work. The dog was part of the operation, not because someone told them it was best practice, because experience had shown them, season after season, that a working environment with a trusted animal present was simply a better environment, safer, calmer, more productive, and more human. I remember one particular evening in the highlands, late in the season, light already fading behind the ridge. I was closing the last hive when Rook went still. Not the relaxed stillness of a dog at rest, the alert stillness of a dog reading something I could not yet perceive. I stopped. I waited. 30 seconds later, two figures appeared at the tree line. They had not come to observe the landscape. They left when they saw him. No confrontation. No incident. Just the quiet, unmistakable message that this place was watched. That someone was already there. That is not a story about a dog being aggressive. It is a story about presence being enough. And in apiculture, as in life, presence is almost always enough. When it is consistent, calm, and genuine. Now I want to give you the specific insight I promised at the beginning of this talk. The one thing that changed everything for me. It was not a breed. It was not a training method. It was a shift in perspective. The moment I stopped asking, how do I keep the dog from interfering with my apiary? And started asking, how do I make my dog part of what the apiary already is? Everything became easier. The integration happened naturally. The bees adjusted. The dog settled. And the work became something I looked forward to, in a way I had not felt since my earliest years in the field. That is the gift of working with living systems rather than against them. They meet you when you stop resisting. This is the principle behind everything I teach. Whether we are talking about colony management, forage planning, or sustainable harvesting, the answer is almost always the same. Observe more. Intervene less. Trust the system. And build your practice around presence, not just production. The most resilient apiaries I have ever visited were not the most technologically advanced. They were the most attentive, run by people who understood that the land speaks constantly, and that our job is simply to listen well enough to hear it. A dog helps you listen. He keeps you grounded in the physical reality of the place. He reminds you that the apiary is not a factory. It is a living landscape, and you are a guest in it, not its owner. That humility, that ecological humility, is what separates good beekeepers from great ones, and it is what will carry this craft forward into a future that desperately needs it. If this talk has given you something to think about, I want to ask you one thing before you leave. Subscribe to this channel, because the conversations we are building here, rooted in real experience, honest observation, and sustainable values, are exactly what this craft needs more of. And if you want to go deeper on any of the topics we've covered today, leave your question in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me about your apiary. Tell me about your dog, ***. Tell me what you're struggling with and what you've discovered. Because the best knowledge in this field has always traveled from keeper to keeper, season to season. And that is exactly what this channel is built to continue. My name is Henry Stonefield, 36 years at the hive, and still learning every single morning before the bees even begin to stir. Today I'm going to reveal a secret to you. Did you know that a single wrong decision about where you place your hives could mean the difference between thriving colonies and total collapse? I'm talking about mistakes that could cost you thousands of dollars, countless hours of work, and worst of all, the heartbreaking loss of your bees. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share could save your entire operation. My name is Henry Stonefield, and 36 years ago, I made a choice that changed my life forever. I was 15, standing in my grandfather's apiary, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across wooden hive boxes. The city felt like a distant memory, and in that moment, I knew I'd never go back. Today, I want to talk to you about something most beekeepers overlook until it's too late. We're going to discuss the secrets of apiary placement, the invisible factors that separate successful beekeepers from those who struggle year after year. This isn't just theory from a textbook. This is 3 decades of mistakes, victories, and hard-won wisdom. Let me start with a story that still haunts me. It was my 3rd year as a beekeeper. I thought I knew everything. I'd read every manual, attended workshops, and my grandfather's voice echoed in my head with decades of experience. I decided to establish a new apiary on the western edge of my property. The location seemed perfect, flat ground, easy access, plenty of flowering plants nearby. Within 6 months, I lost half my colonies. The bees were stressed, production dropped, and I couldn't understand why. My grandfather walked the site with me one cold November morning. He didn't say much at first, just observed. Then he pointed to the northwest. "Do you feel that wind, Henry?" he asked. "Every evening, it cuts across this field like a knife. Your bees are fighting it every single day." I'd placed my hives in a wind tunnel. That mistake taught me something no book ever could. Location isn't just about convenience or aesthetics. It's about understanding the invisible forces that affect your bees every single day. Sun patterns, wind currents, water access, thermal dynamics. And if you think your current setup is fine, I'm going to challenge that assumption before we're done here. Asterisk, asterisk. Let's talk about orientation first, because this is where most people get it wrong. Your hives need to face east or southeast, not north, not west, east or southeast. Why? Because bees are solar-powered creatures. When that first light hits the entrance in the morning, it triggers their entire day. The colony wakes up, foragers prepare for flight, and the internal temperature begins to regulate. I've seen apiaries facing west, and the difference is dramatic. Those colonies start their day hours later. They miss the cool morning nectar flow. By the time they're active, temperatures have risen, and the nectar has already begun to evaporate from the flowers. You're losing production every single day, and you don't even realize it. But here's what most people don't tell you about orientation. It's not just about the entrance. It's about thermal management throughout the entire year. In winter, that eastern sun provides gentle warmth without overheating. In summer, the hives warm up early but avoid the brutal afternoon sun that can turn a hive into an oven. I've measured internal temperatures in poorly oriented hives reaching dangerous levels, above 45 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, comb collapses, brood dies, and bees abandon their home. Now, let's address the wind, because this is critical. Wind is the silent killer of apiaries. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a constant, exhausting drain on your colonies. Bees have to work exponentially harder to maintain hive temperature when wind is constantly pulling heat away. They consume more honey. They wear out faster. Their lifespan shortens. You need protection from the north and northwest. In most temperate regions, these are your coldest, harshest winds. Use natural barriers, tree lines, hedgerows, even buildings or fencing. But here's the key, the barrier shouldn't be a solid wall. I learned this the hard way too. My first windbreak was a solid wooden fence, 2 meters high, running along the northern edge of my apiary. I thought I'd solved the problem. Instead, I created turbulence. The wind hit the fence, curled over the top, and created chaotic air currents that were worse than the original wind. Bees struggled to navigate. Entrance activity was erratic. The solution? Permeable barriers. Trees, shrubs, even specialized windbreak fencing with gaps. These slow the wind rather than blocking it completely. The air filters through, losing velocity but maintaining laminar flow. Your bees can work with that. Think about natural forests. Trees don't create walls, they create layers. And in those layers, countless species find shelter without being trapped in dead air. But here's something most beekeepers never consider. And it's absolutely crucial, wind protection isn't just about the cold months. Summer winds dry out nectar sources, stress foraging bees, and can even prevent proper mating flights for virgin queens. If you're experiencing poor queen mating success, check your wind exposure. Now, distance from urban areas. This is becoming more important every year. When I started beekeeping, rural areas were truly rural. Today, subdivisions creep closer, traffic increases, light pollution expands, and every one of these factors affects your bees. Noise stress is real. Studies have shown that constant traffic noise affects bee communication. Their whittle dance becomes less precise. Recruitment to food sources decreases, and overall colony cohesion suffers. But it's not just the bees. It's also about human safety and tolerance. Bees near residential areas create conflicts, complaints, legal issues. Even if your bees are perfectly gentle, people fear them, and fear leads to problems. Calls to authorities, demands for removal, sometimes even illegal actions against your hives. I maintain a minimum distance of 500 meters from any residence not on my property, more if possible. This isn't just courtesy, it's practical management. Your bees have space to establish flight paths that don't intersect with human activity. Swarms are less likely to settle in problematic locations. And if you need to work your hives during peak activity hours, you're not worrying about neighbors. Water. Let's talk about water, because this is life or death. Bees need water, not just for drinking, but for cooling the hive, diluting honey for feeding larvae, and maintaining proper humidity. A strong colony in summer can require several liters per day. If there's no water source within reasonable flight distance, your bees will find one, and you won't like where they find it. Swimming pools, pet water bowls, garden ponds, air conditioning condensate drips, your neighbor's sprinkler system. Once bees establish a water source, they're loyal to it. Trying to redirect them is nearly impossible. I established one apiary without considering water proximity. Within weeks, I had calls from a farm 3 kilometers away. My bees had found their cattle watering troughs. Hundreds of bees, crowding the edges, occasionally drowning, definitely annoying the cattle. It created tension. It was embarrassing, and it was entirely preventable. Natural water sources are ideal: streams, rivers, springs. But they need safe landing areas. Bees can't land on open water. They need edges, floating vegetation, rocks, anything that provides purchase. If your water source is a fast-moving stream with steep banks, it's useless to them. I've created artificial water sources when natural ones weren't available. Shallow trays with rocks or floating core pieces. Automatic chicken waterers. Even wine bottles inverted over dishes create perfect bee-accessible water. But here's the critical part. Establish these before you move bees to the location. If you set up your apiary first and then add water, the bees have already found their source elsewhere. You're too late. Remember this. Bees don't change their minds easily. Access roads and vehicle entry. This seems obvious, but I've seen apiaries that require hiking equipment to reach. You need to move equipment. Supers full of honey are heavy, 30 to 40 kilograms each. Multiply that by dozens of hives, and you're talking about serious weight. If you can't get a vehicle reasonably close, you're creating unnecessary physical strain. But it's not just about convenience. It's about emergency access and efficiency. If you need to move hives quickly, whether for pollination contracts, disease management, or environmental hazards, you need vehicle access. I've had to evacuate apiaries ahead of wildfires. I've relocated hives to escape pesticide applications. These situations don't wait for you to make 30 trips with a handcart. Design your apiary so you can work behind the hives. This is crucial. You should never have to stand directly in the flight path when opening hives. Position your access road or path so you approach from the rear or side. This reduces defensive behavior, makes inspections calmer, and protects you from the constant traffic of returning foragers. I walk behind my hive rows. My vehicle parks to the side or rear. When I'm working, bees can come and go without navigating around me. It's a small detail that makes enormous difference in how your bees respond to management. Shade and sun balance. This is more nuanced than most people realize. Yes, bees need sun. Morning sun especially, as we discussed. But summer heat can be deadly. I've measured ground temperatures in full sun exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. High boxes sitting on that ground absorb tremendous heat. The bees spend all their energy on cooling instead of foraging and brood rearing. Partial shade is the answer, but it has to be the right kind of shade. Dappled shade from deciduous trees is ideal. In spring, when colonies are building up, the trees are leafless, allowing full sun. In summer, when heat stress peaks, the canopy provides cooling shade, and those same trees offer windbreak benefits. But be careful with tree selection. Avoid trees that drop sticky sap or excessive debris onto hives. I made the mistake once of placing hives under eucalyptus trees. The bark shedding was constant, filling entrance reducers, creating cleaning work for the bees, and providing hiding places for pests like small hive beetles. Also consider shade timing. Afternoon shade is more valuable than morning shade. That eastern sun we want in the morning, by afternoon, especially in summer, it becomes problematic. Trees that shade from the west and southwest, while leaving the east and southeast open, create perfect conditions. I've also used shade cloth in exposed apiaries, suspended above the hives at about a meter's height. 40 to 50% shade cloth reduces temperature without blocking airflow. It's artificial, yes, but it works when natural shade isn't available. Drainage and soil conditions. I cannot stress this enough. Wet ground is devastating to hives. The moisture wicks up through the bottom board, increasing internal humidity, promoting disease, encouraging mold, and making temperature regulation nearly impossible. I've seen colonies develop chronic nosema problems purely because of ground moisture. Your apiary site needs to shed water, not collect it. Avoid low spots, depressions, or areas where water pools after rain. Even slight slopes are better than flat ground. The water moves away instead of sitting. Soil type matters too. Clay soils retain water. Sandy or loamy soils drain well. If you're stuck with clay soil, you can improve the site. I've built up apiary platforms with gravel and sand, creating artificial drainage. It's extra work initially, but it pays dividends for years. And consider what that ground moisture means for your working conditions. Muddy apiaries are miserable. Equipment gets dirty. You track mud everywhere. Lifting heavy supers while trying not to slip is dangerous. A well-drained site makes every aspect of beekeeping more pleasant. Hive spacing. This is where biology meets practicality. Bees navigate by visual landmarks and pattern recognition. If hives are too close together, drifting becomes a problem. Bees returning from foraging flights enter the wrong hive. This spreads disease. It creates strong colonies that rob weak ones. It messes with your record keeping because hive populations don't match your expectations. I maintain a minimum of 1 meter between hive entrances. More is better. 2 to 3 meters is ideal if space allows. But it's not just about the distance. It's about differentiation. Paint hive boxes different colors. Use different entrance configurations. Vary the height slightly. Add visual markers, rocks, plants, anything that helps bees distinguish their home from their neighbors. I've seen dramatic reductions in drifting just by painting alternating hives in different colors. There's also a practical management reason for spacing. You need room to work. Opening a hive while standing between two others means bees from 3 colonies are now aware of your presence. Defensive behavior multiplies. With proper spacing, you can work one hive while the others remain relatively undisturbed. Now, here's where most people mess up completely, and I need you to pay close attention to this asterisk. They space hives for convenience, not for the bees. They create perfect rows with military precision. It looks organized. It's completely wrong. In nature, bee colonies don't exist in rows. They're scattered, at varying distances, in diverse locations. When you impose artificial uniformity, you're working against millions of years of evolution. I've moved away from strict geometric arrangements. My apiaries now have irregular spacing, natural groupings of 2 or 3 hives. then gaps, then more hives. Some face slightly different directions. Some are elevated differently. The result? Healthier bees. Less drifting. Better orientation. Security and privacy. This isn't paranoia. It's reality. Beehives represent value. The bees themselves, the equipment, and especially the honey. Theft happens. Vandalism happens. And in today's world, you need to protect your investment. Location privacy is your first defense. If random passersby can see your apiary, they know it's there. Keep apiaries away from public roads, trails, or easily accessible areas. I'm not suggesting hiding in remote wilderness, but thoughtful placement reduces visibility. I don't advertise my apiary locations on social media with GPS coordinates. I don't put up signs. My apiaries are known to my bee club members and a few trusted colleagues. But that's it. This has prevented problems. Fencing can help, but it needs to be appropriate. A massive chain link fence around an apiary draws attention. Natural barriers, hedgerows, or simple agricultural fencing maintains security without screaming valuable stuff here. And consider human traffic patterns. Placing an apiary next to a popular hiking trail might seem fine until you realize hundreds of people pass by each weekend. Even well-intentioned people get curious. They approach. They disturb. Sometimes they get stung. And then you have liability issues. Distance from high human activity isn't just about the bees. It's about protecting yourself legally and practically. I want to pause here and ask you something. Are you seeing patterns in your own setup that might be causing problems? Maybe that mysterious queen failure. Those colonies that never seem to build up properly. The constant robbing behavior. Sometimes the answer isn't in the hive. It's in where the hive is sitting. Let me share another story, this one about a mistake I see repeated constantly. A beekeeper contacted me 5 years ago. She'd been keeping bees for 2 seasons and couldn't understand why her colonies consistently underperformed. Her management seemed sound. She fed appropriately, treated for varroa, replaced queens when needed, yet her honey production was half what it should be. I visited her apiary on a bright June morning. The sight was beautiful. Rolling hills, wildflowers everywhere, picture perfect. The hive sat in a small valley, sheltered and peaceful. And there was the problem. That valley was a frost pocket. Cold air is heavier than warm air. At night, it flows downhill like water, settling in low areas. Her bees were experiencing near-freezing temperatures on spring mornings when hives just 50 meters uphill remained comfortably warm. The colony development was delayed by weeks. By the time her bees built up to full strength, the main nectar flow was already ending. We relocated those hives to higher ground. The next season, her production doubled. This is what I mean about invisible factors. You can't see cold air pooling. You can't see the stress it creates. But your bees feel it every single night, asterisk asterisk. Let me talk about something most beekeepers never consider. Electromagnetic fields. I'm not talking about pseudoscience or conspiracy theories. I'm talking about documented research showing that bees are sensitive to electromagnetic radiation. High voltage power lines, cell towers, radio transmitters, all of these emit fields that can affect bee navigation and behavior. I won't place apiaries directly under power lines. Not because I think it will kill the bees immediately, but because why add another stressor? Bees face enough challenges. If I can eliminate even one potential problem by choosing a location 200 meters to the left, I'll do it. The same applies to agricultural chemical exposure. You need to know what's happening on surrounding land. Is there a cornfield that gets aerial pesticide applications? Is there an orchard that sprays during bloom? Are there neighbors who liberally apply lawn chemicals? I've learned to ask questions before establishing apiaries. I talk to farmers. I check with extension offices. I look at aerial photos to identify potential problem areas. And I've walked away from seemingly perfect locations because the surrounding land use was too risky. One apiary I considered had everything. Perfect orientation, good windbreak, excellent forage. But 3 sides were bordered by conventional agriculture, intensive pesticide users. I declined the location. 2 years later, a beekeeper who didn't ask those questions placed hives there. He lost 70% of his colonies in a single spray incident. Your apiary location is only as good as what surrounds it. Remember that, asterisk asterisk. Now let's discuss forage proximity, because this ties directly into apiary placement. Bees can fly several kilometers to forage, but that doesn't mean they should have to. Every meter they fly costs energy, energy that could go into honey production, brood rearing, or hive maintenance instead goes into transportation. Ideally, major forage sources should be within 1 to 2 kilometers. Closer is better. I placed apiaries specifically to access particular crops or natural forage areas. Spring tree blooms, summer wildflower meadows, fall aster fields. If I can position hives so bees have abundant forage within 500 meters, production increases dramatically. But here's the nuance. You don't want a monoculture. Even if it's a heavy nectar producer, nutritional diversity matters. Bees need varied pollen sources for proper nutrition. An apiary surrounded only by canola might produce lots of honey, but colony health often suffers from nutritional deficiency. I look for locations with diverse forage across the season. Early spring willows and maples, mid-season clovers and wildflowers, late summer goldenrod and asters. This ensures continuous nutrition and extended production periods. Topography affects more than just drainage and frost pockets. It influences flight patterns and energy expenditure. Bees returning to hives laden with nectar or pollen are heavy. If your apiary sits at the top of a hill and major forage is in the valley below, every returning bee must climb that elevation while carrying cargo. It's exhausting. It reduces the number of trips they can make per day. Over a season, it significantly impacts production. Conversely, if hives are in the valley and forage is uphill, outbound bees work harder, but they return downhill with their loads. It's less efficient than level flight, but better than climbing while loaded. I try to place apiaries at the same elevation as primary forage, or slightly below it. Let gravity work for you, not against you. Microclimate variations matter more than most people realize. I have apiaries separated by less than 5 kilometers that experience completely different conditions. One is in an open field, exposed to wind and temperature extremes. Another is in a forest clearing, protected and stable. The forest apiary consistently outperforms, even though soil and forage are similar. Those trees buffer temperature swings. Summer days are cooler. Winter nights are warmer. The bees expend less energy on climate control and more on productive activities. It's a perfect example of how subtle environmental factors compound over time. Pay attention to morning fog patterns too. Some valleys collect fog that doesn't burn off until mid-morning. Your bees lose productive foraging hours every single day. Over a season, those lost hours add up to significant production losses. I have one apiary that's fog-free by 7 a.m. and another just 2 kilometers away where fog persists until 9 or 10. Guess which one produces more honey? The difference isn't dramatic in any single day, but multiplied across 100 foraging days, it becomes substantial. If you're still watching, I want to acknowledge something. This might seem overwhelming, so many factors to consider. But here's the truth. You don't need perfection. You need awareness, asterisk asterisk. Understanding these principles allows you to make informed compromises. Maybe you can't avoid all wind exposure, but you can minimize it. Maybe you can't find the perfect water source, but you can create one. Maybe your access isn't ideal, but you can improve it incrementally. The worst mistakes happen when beekeepers don't know these factors exist. They place hives based on convenience alone, then wonder why beekeeping is so difficult. It's not that beekeeping is inherently hard. It's that they're forcing their bees to overcome environmental obstacles every single day. Let me address seasonal considerations. Because your apiary location might work beautifully in summer and be a disaster in winter. I learned this with a mountain apiary I established early in my career. Summer was spectacular. Abundant wildflowers, perfect temperatures, excellent production. Then winter arrived. Snow accumulated faster than I anticipated. Access roads became impassable. I couldn't reach the hives for weeks at a time. When I finally got there, I discovered that several hives had tipped over in heavy snow and wind. Others were buried so deeply that ventilation was compromised. Now I consider winter accessibility as carefully as summer forage. Can I reach the hives in snow? Is there risk of avalanche or heavy snow load? Will winter winds be manageable? These aren't theoretical questions. They determine whether your bees survive until spring. In regions with harsh winters, I've seen beekeepers who move hives to protected winter locations, then relocate them to productive summer sites. It's extra work, but it solves the seasonal conflict between optimal production and optimal protection. Humidity is another often overlooked factor. Bees can manage cold. They can't manage cold and wet. High humidity locations, near rivers, in foggy valleys, or in dense forests without air movement, create moisture problems inside hives. Condensation forms on inner covers, drips onto winter clusters, and chills bees that can't afford heat loss. I've lost more colonies to moisture than to cold. A hive in a dry, cold location will often outperform one in a damp, mild location. Good air circulation helps, but it needs to be gentle circulation, not wind. Forest clearings often provide this. Enough air movement to prevent stagnant moisture without creating drafts that steal heat. Aspect and slope orientation matter beyond just hive entrance direction. A south-facing slope receives more solar radiation than a north-facing slope. In cold climates, this can mean the difference between colonies that build up early and those that lag behind by crucial weeks. I have hives on both sides of a ridge. The south-facing apiary starts spring buildup 2 to 3 weeks earlier. Those weeks matter enormously. Early buildup means stronger colonies for the main flow, which means better production and healthier bees going into winter. In hot climates, the calculation reverses. A north-facing slope might provide relief from excessive heat, creating better summer conditions even if spring is slightly delayed. Let me share one final location story that changed how I think about apiary placement. I had an apiary that performed inconsistently. Some years excellent, other years poor, with no clear pattern. I couldn't identify the cause. Then I started keeping detailed weather records specific to that location. The pattern emerged. In years with prevailing winds from the southwest, the apiary thrived. When winds shifted to northwest, production dropped. The difference? Southwest winds brought warm, moist air from the coast. Northwest winds brought cold, dry air from the interior. I couldn't change the weather, but I could add windbreaks that specifically blocked northwest winds while allowing southwest flows. Production stabilized. Good years became more predictable. This taught me that observation over time reveals patterns that aren't obvious initially. Your first year in a location is learning. Your second year is understanding. By the third year, you truly know the site. ****. Don't expect to place hives perfectly on the first attempt. Be willing to adjust. Move hives if they're not performing. Add windbreaks if needed. Modify access routes. Create water sources. Your apiary should evolve as your understanding deepens. Some of my best apiaries took years to optimize. I added trees for windbreaks. I improved drainage with gravel. I repositioned individual hives to reduce drifting. Each small improvement compounded until the site functioned beautifully. Practical placement also means thinking about your own comfort and safety. Will you enjoy working this location? Is it pleasant to visit? Can you work efficiently without exhausting yourself? I have seen beekeepers choose difficult locations because they seemed ideal for the bees, then grow to resent the work required. Beekeeping should be enjoyable. If accessing your apiary feels like a punishment, you'll avoid it. You'll miss problems. You'll delay necessary interventions. Choose locations you'll want to visit, where the drive is pleasant, where working feels good, where you can sit afterward and watch your bees, feeling satisfied with your work. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Apiary location isn't a single decision. It's a series of considerations, each building on the others. ***. Start with the non-negotiables. Sun exposure, wind protection, water access. Then optimize from there. Better drainage, improve access, enhance forage, reduced human conflict. Every site has compromises. Perfect locations don't exist, but informed compromises, where you consciously accept certain limitations while maximizing strengths, lead to successful beekeeping. I've placed apiaries in less than ideal locations and made them work through careful management. I've also seen beekeepers squander perfect locations through ignorance of these principles. Knowledge makes the difference. Your bees can't tell you when location is stressing them. They just work harder, wear out faster, and produce less. They deserve better. They deserve a beekeeper who understands that where you place the hive is as important as how you manage it. Standing in my apiaries now, 36 years after that first morning with my grandfather, I see locations differently. I see the morning sun touching each entrance at precisely the right angle. I see windbreaks filtering cold northern air. I see water sources within easy flight distance. But more than that, I see the invisible, the thermal currents, the flight paths, the energy expenditure, the accumulated stress or comfort that determines whether a colony thrives or merely survives. This is the secret of successful beekeeping. Understanding that your bees live in an environment you created for them. Today I'm going to tell you an anecdote from my personal life that will help you on your path. What if I told you that bees taught me more about life in 3 months than my entire existence in the city? Stay until the end because what I discovered changed my perspective forever. 5 years ago, at 25 years old, I made a decision many called madness. I left my downtown apartment, my office job, my predictable routines. I left everything to return to my grandparents' land, up in the mountains, where silence speaks louder than any horn. At first, it was fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of failure, fear of not fitting back into a world I had abandoned so long ago. But there was something stronger than fear, the need to reconnect with something real, something that beat at the same rhythm as my heart. The first days were about adaptation. I cleaned the old stone house, repaired fences, walked every corner of those lands that held the footsteps of generations. And it was during one of those walks when I saw them. A swarm of bees danced around a blooming almond tree. I stopped, not out of fear this time, but out of fascination. There was something hypnotic about their movement, something that seemed to contain an encrypted message I couldn't yet decipher. For weeks, I returned to that same place. I watched them at dawn, when dew still glistened on the flowers. I watched them at noon, in their productive frenzy. I watched them at sunset, when they returned loaded to their hive. And then it happened. One morning, while drinking coffee sitting on a nearby log, I witnessed what beekeepers call the waggle dance. A worker had just returned and, on the entrance comb, executed precise circular movements, vibrated her abdomen, traced figure eights in the air. Other bees surrounded her, attentive, reading her language. Later I learned she was indicating where to find food, the exact distance, the precise direction relative to the sun. But in that moment I only felt a chill run down my spine. I was witnessing pure communication, collective intelligence, a system perfected over millions of years, asterisk asterisk. That afternoon I went down to the village. I looked for old Tomas, the only beekeeper left in the area. I told him what I had seen. He smiled with that wisdom that only decades of experience bring. 3 days later, Tomas appeared at my door with a wooden box, his patched beekeeper's suit, and infinite patience. That's how my real education began. He taught me to read the weather in the clouds, to understand the cycle of flowers, to listen to the hum of a healthy hive. He taught me that beekeeping isn't about extracting honey, but about creating conditions for bees to thrive. That our role is that of guardians, not owners. The first time I opened a hive, my hands trembled inside the gloves. Smoke from the smoker rose slowly, calming the guards. And when I lifted the first frame, what I saw took my breath away. Thousands of bees working in perfect synchrony. Each one knew exactly what to do. Nurse bees feeding larvae, builders raising perfectly hexagonal wax cells, fanners regulating temperature and humidity, foragers arriving loaded with pollen. It was a functional city, a complete organism, a miniature democracy where each individual sacrificed its own interest for the common good. And there, with the afternoon sun gilding the wax frames, I understood why I had returned. I hadn't fled the city. I had come looking for this purpose, connection, belonging to something greater than myself. The following months were of intense learning. Each mistake cost me dearly, not in money, but in the lives of bees that depended on my decisions. I learned to detect diseases, to prevent varroa without aggressive chemicals, to understand when a hive needed more space or when it was preparing to swarm. But above all, I learned to observe. Bees are silent teachers. They teach you patience because you can't rush them. They teach you humility because their world existed long before you and will continue after. They teach you about interdependence because without flowers there are no bees. Without bees there's no pollination. Without pollination there's no food. One spring day, while checking the hives, I noticed something strange. One of them, the one I called Aurora, had less activity. The bees entered and left with less energy. The zumbido sonaba differente, mas apagado. I opened carefully. What I saw froze my blood. The queen had died and the colony was in chaos. Without her guiding pheromone, without her ability to lay eggs, the entire hive was doomed. But then I observed something extraordinary. The workers had begun building queen cells, larger, special ones. They had selected young larvae and fed them exclusively with royal jelly. They were creating new queens. The colony was saving itself. For days I observed that process. The queen cells grew, elongated and rough, and when the first princess emerged, slender and golden, I knew I was witnessing an evolutionary miracle. That new queen would have to fight against her sisters, the other princesses. Only one would survive. Then she would fly on her mating flight, mating with up to 20 drones in full flight, storing enough sperm for her entire life. And finally she would return to rule, laying up to 2,000 eggs daily for years. All that complexity, all that perfection, happening in a simple wooden box in my garden, asterisk asterisk. As the seasons passed, my apiary grew. From one hive I went to 5, then to 10. But I never lost sight of the principle Tomas taught me. Ecological beekeeping isn't about how much you produce, but how you produce it. I refused to use aggressive chemical treatments. Instead, I implemented integrated management practices. Hives with good ventilation, young and vigorous queens, natural feeding, respect for the bees' cycles. The first years were economically tough. I produced less honey than industrial operations. But my honey was different. It was unheated honey, without aggressive filtering, with all its pollen and propolis intact. It was honey that tasted like mountains, like wildflowers, like time and patience. And people noticed. Visitors started arriving. First curious neighbors, then families from the cities seeking to reconnect with nature. Later schools wanting their students to understand where food comes from. That's how my educational agritourism project was born. I built an observation room with glass windows where visitors could watch the bees work without disturbing them. I created workshops where children could learn about pollination, about the importance of biodiversity, about how every small action counts. I remember a girl, maybe 8 years old, who came with her school. She was terrified of bees. She stood far back while her classmates approached the observation window. I sat next to her. I told her that bees don't want to sting, that stinging means death for them, that they only defend when they feel threatened. I told her about how bees see flowers, about ultraviolet patterns invisible to us that guide them like airport runways. Slowly, she approached. First one step, then another, until she was pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. At the end of the visit, she hugged me. When I grow up, she whispered, I want to take care of bees too. That moment reminded me why I had left the city. Not to escape, but to find purpose. And that purpose was multiplying, spreading like pollen in the wind, asterisk asterisk. But beekeeping alone wasn't enough. The land demanded more. My grandparents had raised sheep here, and the old stone barn still stood, waiting. I started researching ecological livestock farming. I read about regenerative grazing, about how properly managed animals can restore soil health rather than degrade it, about how biodiversity and productivity aren't opposites, but allies. I started small. For sheep, an old breed adapted to mountains. I named them after seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. They grazed the slopes, their hooves aerating the soil, their manure fertilizing the land. And something magical happened. Where the sheep grazed, wildflowers bloomed more abundantly the following year. More flowers meant more food for the bees. More bees meant better pollination. Better pollination meant healthier plants. Healthier plants meant better grazing. It was a virtuous cycle, each element strengthening the others. I expanded gradually. Added chickens that followed the sheep, scratching through manure, eating parasites, further fertilizing the soil. Their eggs, golden yolk from the diverse diet, became another source of income. Then came the vegetable garden, not rows of monoculture, but polyculture beds inspired by forest ecosystems. Tomatoes grew alongside basil, which repelled pests. Beans fixed nitrogen for heavy feeding squash. Flowers throughout attracted beneficial insects. And always, everywhere, the bees, pollinating, connecting, weaving the web that held everything together, asterisk asterisk. People started calling what I was doing modern ecological farming, but I saw it differently. This wasn't modern. This was ancient wisdom, refined over millennia, now backed by scientific understanding. My grandparents knew these principles instinctively. They rotated crops, kept diverse animals, left hedgerows for wildlife. They didn't call it biodiversity management or ecosystem services. They just called it good farming. I was simply rediscovering what had been forgotten in the rush toward industrialization. The economic model was challenging. I couldn't compete with factory farms on price. A dozen of my eggs cost more than supermarket eggs. My honey was triple the price of imported honey. My lamb was premium priced. But I wasn't selling just products. I was selling story, transparency, values. People who bought from me knew the chickens had scratched in real dirt, that the bees had never touched sugar water, that the lambs had grazed on flower-filled meadows. They knew because they could visit, they could see, they could connect. And increasingly, people wanted that connection. The agritourism aspect grew. I started offering weekend workshops, introduction to beekeeping, understanding regenerative farming, from hive to table, the journey of honey. Participants came from cities, stressed and disconnected. They arrived Friday evening, tense and checking phones constantly. By Sunday afternoon, they left transformed, calmer, more present, with dirt under their fingernails and light in their eyes. One participant, a corporate lawyer named Sarah, cried during the bee workshop. I'd forgotten life could be this simple, she said. This real. 6 months later, Sarah returned. She quit her job. She was looking for land. She wanted to start her own project. Stories like Sarah's became common. I was accidentally becoming not just a farmer, but a catalyst for others' transformations. But it wasn't all poetry and transformation. There were brutal realities too. The first winter, I lost 3 hives to cold and starvation. I had miscalculated their honey reserves. My mistake. Their death. I sat in the snow, looking at the silent hives, and wept. These weren't just economic losses. These were living communities I'd failed to protect. Tomas found me there. He didn't offer empty comfort. Every beekeeper loses hives, he said. The question is whether you learn from it. I did learn. I learned to leave more honey, to insulate hives better, to check winter stores more carefully. The next winter, all my hives survived. There were predators too. Bears came for honey. Hawks took chickens. Foxes tried for lambs. At first, my instinct was to fight, to exclude, to protect my assets. But then I remembered the bees' lesson, everything is connected. The bears were here first. This was their land before it was farmland. Instead of electric fences, I moved hives closer to the house, used bear-proof containers for honey storage. We coexisted. The hawks took weak chickens, the ones that would have suffered anyway. They were doing natural selection's work. I accepted reasonable losses as the cost of running a truly ecological operation. And slowly, I noticed something. As I worked with nature rather than against it, the farm became more resilient. Diverse predators meant no single pest exploded in population. Diverse crops meant some always succeeded even when others failed. Diverse income streams meant a bad honey year didn't sink the whole operation. Diversity wasn't just ecological wisdom. It was economic wisdom too, asterisk asterisk. Year 3 brought the biggest challenge, drought. Spring rains never came. The wildflowers, usually abundant, barely bloomed. The bees struggled to find forage. I watched my carefully built system stress under the pressure. Hives started consuming their reserves. The sheep grazed on drying grasses. The garden wilted despite hand watering. But here's what didn't happen: complete collapse. The system's diversity saved it. When wildflowers failed, the bees turned to garden vegetables and herbs. When pasture dried, sheep browsed on drought-resistant shrubs. The chickens thrived on insects that multiplied in the heat. An industrial monoculture would have failed completely. My ecosystem adapted. By summer's end, we had survived. Production was down 40%, but we survived. And the experience taught me more than any abundant year could have. It taught me that resilience isn't about preventing all stress. It's about building systems that can absorb stress and recover. It's about redundancy, diversity, and flexibility. These were lessons the bees had been trying to teach me all along. A strong hive doesn't depend on one food source. It maintains flexibility, adaptability, resilience, asterisk asterisk. As my 4th year began, the project had evolved beyond my wildest initial imaginings. What started as one man's return to ancestral land had become a small but vibrant ecological enterprise. I employed 2 part-time workers. both young people from the village who'd been considering leaving for city jobs. Maria helped with the livestock and gardens. Carlos managed the agritourism and workshop bookings. We formed a small cooperative with 3 neighboring farms, all practicing similar ecological methods. Together we shared equipment, knowledge, and marketing. We were stronger together than apart, just like bees in a hive. The education programs expanded. Local schools now brought classes regularly. We developed curriculum-aligned programs about ecology, agriculture, and sustainability. Children who'd never seen where food comes from suddenly understood. I remember a boy asking, if bees are so important, why do people kill them with pesticides? It was a child's question, but it cut to the heart of everything. Why indeed? I explained about industrial agriculture, about the pressure to produce more and cheaper, about how we've lost sight of long-term consequences in pursuit of short-term gains. But I also told him about the growing movement of farmers choosing different paths. Change is happening, I said, and it starts with people like you asking questions like that. The technical aspects of ecological beekeeping became second nature. I learned to read a hive's health by its entrance activity. A strong hive has purposeful traffic, bees departing with determination, returning heavy with pollen in rainbow colors, yellow from dandelions, orange from poppies, gray-blue from phacelia. I learned the seasons through the bees' eyes. Spring meant frantic expansion, adding supers as the hive exploded with new life. Summer meant watching for swarm preparations, ensuring adequate space. Autumn meant harvest and preparation, leaving enough stores for winter. Winter meant restraint, resisting the urge to open hives, trusting them to cluster and survive. Each season taught patience, observation, trust in natural processes. The livestock integration deepened. I implemented rotational grazing, moving the sheep every few days to fresh pasture. Behind them came the chickens in a mobile coop, scratching through manure, breaking parasite cycles, spreading fertility. The land responded. Soil that had been compacted and depleted began to soften, darken, come alive. I sent samples to a lab. Organic matter was increasing. Microbial life was exploding. The land was healing. And with healthier soil came healthier plants. The pasture became more diverse. Species I hadn't planted appeared: clover, plantain, chicory. The sheep selected their own balanced diet from this salad bar of forages. The bees benefited enormously. More plant diversity meant longer bloom periods, more varied nutrition. My honey became more complex in flavor, reflecting the terroir of this particular mountain, this particular season. I started keeping detailed records, not just production numbers, but observations. When did the first almond bloom? When did swallows return? When did I hear the first frog? These phenological markers told stories about climate, about ecosystem health, about the interconnection of all life here. One spring, the swallows arrived 2 weeks early. The almonds bloomed 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The bees began foraging in February instead of March. Climate change wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It was happening here, measurable, undeniable. But I also noticed adaptation. The bees adjusted their cycles. Plants bloomed in new patterns. The system was resilient, but it was changing. And that meant I needed to change too, to remain flexible, to keep learning. This is what ecological farming teaches: humility in the face of complexity, willingness to adapt, recognition that we're participants in systems far older and wiser than ourselves. Asterisk asterisk. The workshops evolved. Initially, I focused on technical skills: how to light a smoker, how to identify queen cells, how to extract honey. But I realized people needed something deeper. They needed to understand the why, not just the how. So I started teaching systems thinking. I'd take groups on walks through the farm, showing how everything connected: the composting chickens, the pollinating bees, the fertilizing sheep, the nitrogen-fixing clover, each element serving multiple functions, each function supported by multiple elements. This is resilience, I'd explain. This is how nature works. And this is how we can work with nature instead of against it. People got it. I could see the moment of understanding in their eyes. That shift from seeing separate things to seeing relationships, patterns, wholes. One participant, an engineer named David, stayed after a workshop. This is systems engineering, he said, but applied to living things. It's brilliant. He returned a month later with his teenage daughter. I want her to see this, he said. I want her to know there are other ways to live. to work, to be in the world. That's when I realized my real product wasn't honey or eggs or lamb. It was hope. It was proof that alternatives exist, that another world is possible. Asterisk asterisk. The cooperative grew. 5 farms now, all within 10 kilometers. We shared a commercial kitchen for value-added products. We coordinated planting so we could offer continuous vegetable boxes to subscribers. We pooled resources for a shared tractor, a shared honey extractor, shared market stalls. We met monthly, sharing knowledge, solving problems collectively. When one farm had a livestock emergency, others provided help. When someone experimented with a new technique, everyone learned from the results. It was the opposite of competition. It was collaboration, mutual support, collective resilience, just like a bee colony. In fact, I often thought about how much human economic systems could learn from bees. Bees don't hoard. They share resources freely within the hive. They communicate openly about opportunities and threats. They make decisions collectively. They prioritize the health of the whole over individual gain. What if our economy worked that way? The question haunted me. Because I'd seen both systems, the competitive, extractive, individualistic economy of the city, and this collaborative, regenerative, collective economy of the cooperative. I knew which one felt more human, more sustainable, more aligned with life itself. Year 5 brought unexpected recognition. A regional sustainable agriculture network invited me to speak at their annual conference. Me, a former office worker with 5 years of farming experience, speaking to career farmers. I almost declined. What did I have to teach these people? But then I thought about the visitors who'd transformed, about Sarah who'd quit her corporate job, about the engineer who wanted his daughter to see alternatives. Maybe my perspective as someone who'd crossed from one world to another had value. The conference was in the capital, 3 hours away. I hadn't been to a city since I'd left 5 years before. Driving in felt surreal. The noise, the crowds, the concrete, the speed. How had I lived like this? My talk was scheduled for late afternoon. All day, I attended sessions, listened to researchers discussing soil microbiology, farmers debating policy, activists presenting climate data. The knowledge was impressive, but something felt missing. Then I realized what it was: emotion. Everyone spoke from their heads, not their hearts. Facts and figures, strategies and solutions, but no soul. Asterisk asterisk. When my turn came, I didn't use the slides I'd prepared. I told my story instead. The bees dancing, the hive opening for the first time, the dead colonies in snow, the girl who overcame her fear, the land healing under careful stewardship. I spoke about fear and courage, about loss and learning, about connection and purpose. I spoke about how the bees had saved me as much as I'd saved them. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone. People approached afterward with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," a young woman said. "I've been thinking about quitting my job and starting a farm, but I was afraid. You showed me it's possible." An older farmer gripped my hand. "I've been farming 40 years, he said. "Conventional methods. But I'm tired of fighting the land. What you described, that's how my grandfather farmed. Maybe it's time to remember." That night, driving home through dark mountains, I understood something profound. The real revolution isn't just in the methods. It's in remembering that farming is relationship, not domination. It's partnership with life, not warfare against it. Asterisk asterisk. The farm continued evolving. Word spread after the conference. Journalists visited, wrote articles. A documentary filmmaker spent a week filming. The attention was flattering but also uncomfortable. I didn't want to be a personality. I wanted the ideas to spread, not my face. But I learned to use the platform. Every interview, every article, I emphasized the same points. Ecological farming isn't just possible, it's necessary. It's not about going backward. It's about going forward with ancient wisdom. It's not sacrifice, it's fulfillment. The waiting list for workshops grew to 6 months. I could have expanded, hired more staff, built more infrastructure. The business consultant I'd hired suggested exactly that. "Scale up," he said. "Franchise the model. You could have 10 farms operating under your brand within 2 years." I thought about it. More farms meant more ecological land management, more people trained, more impact. But something felt wrong. That evening, I sat with my hives at sunset, watching the last foragers return. The bees didn't scale up recklessly. They swarmed when ready, split naturally, maintained right-sized colonies. Growth, yes, but organic growth, sustainable growth. I declined the franchise model. Instead, I focused on deepening rather than expanding. Better workshops, more thorough training, stronger support for graduates who wanted to start their own projects. Quality over quantity, depth over breadth, relationship over transaction. Varied be like, actually, if you're feeling inspired by this journey, if you're wondering how these principles could apply to your own life or community, leave a comment. Share your thoughts, your questions, your own stories. I read every single one, and your perspectives help this conversation grow richer. What aspects of ecological farming interest you most? What's holding you back from making changes in your own life? Asterisk asterisk. The cooperative launched a small-scale processing facility. We could now make cheese from sheep milk, cure meats, bottle honey in various sizes, create gift boxes. Value-added products meant better income for everyone, but we maintained principles. No industrial equipment that required massive throughput to justify costs. No pressure to produce volume over quality. Everything remained human scale, handcrafted, traceable. Our products cost more. Significantly more. A jar of our mountain honey cost what 3 jars of supermarket honey cost. Our lamb was double the price of commodity meat, yet we sold everything we produced. Because people increasingly wanted to know their food story. They wanted to support systems aligned with their values. They were willing to pay for transparency, for ecology, for animals treated with dignity. This gave me hope. Not everyone could afford our prices, and that troubled me. But the fact that a market existed at all, that people valued these things enough to prioritize them in their budgets, suggested shifting consciousness. The children who visited the farm particularly moved me. They arrived with ideas shaped by industrial food systems. They thought milk came from cartons, eggs from styrofoam trays, honey from plastic bears. Watching their faces when they saw a chicken lay an egg, when they tasted honey straight from the comb, when they bottle-fed an orphan lamb, those moments were priceless. One boy, maybe 10, stood watching bees for half an hour. Just watching. In an age of screens and constant stimulation, he stood perfectly still, mesmerized by the dance of life. His mother approached me. "He has ADHD," she whispered. I'd never seen him this focused. Nature heals. Not just land, but people. The bees taught me that. They taught me that we're not separate from nature, struggling to fit in. We are nature, and when we remember that, we come home to ourselves, asterisk asterisk. The seasons cycle now with familiar rhythm. 5 years have become a lifetime of learning. The scared 25-year-old who arrived here barely recognizes himself in the mirror. My hands are callous now. My skin weathered by sun and wind. I move slower, observe more, speak less. The mountain has shaped me as surely as water shapes stone. The bees continue teaching. Every day, every season, every open hive reveals new mysteries. I'll never master beekeeping. I'll only deepen my apprenticeship to these ancient creatures, asterisk asterisk. People ask if I miss the city. I tell them I miss nothing. But that's not quite true. I miss who I thought I had to be. I miss the illusion of control. I miss the simplicity of disconnection. What I don't miss is the emptiness. The feeling of living someone else's life. The suspicion that there had to be something more. Because there is something more. It's here, in dirt under fingernails and bees humming in afternoon sun. It's in lambs wobbling on new legs and seeds becoming food. It's in the ancient conversation between human hands and living land, asterisk asterisk. This isn't everyone's path. Not everyone needs to leave cities or start farms, but everyone needs connection. To place, to purpose, to something larger than themselves. For me, that connection came through bees. Through tiny creatures performing their eternal dance, teaching patience and observation and humility. Your connection might look different, but I promise you, it's there, waiting. The question is whether you're brave enough to find it, asterisk asterisk. My grandfather used to say, the land remembers those who love it. I understand now. This land remembers his footsteps, his care. And someday it will remember mine, not because of what I extracted, but because of what I gave back. Not because I conquered, but because I listened. Not because I owned, but because I belonged. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked questions or inspired ideas, please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories too. What's your relationship with nature? What small step could you take toward deeper connection? Your voice matters in this conversation. Asterisk asterisk. The sun sets behind the mountains now. The last bees return home, heavy with pollen. Tomorrow they'll dance again, sharing maps to flowers, continuing their work of holding the world together. And I'll be here, their student, their guardian, their partner in the ancient work of keeping life alive. This is what it means to not fear living in the field. Not running from something, but running toward everything that matters.